the first one was the one that I suppose, introduced me to this idea of doing hard things. The Goggins argument, right? It's the,
Yeah.
or it's also like sits within Stoicism, which is like life will present itself with involuntary suffering. So choose voluntary suffering to create an immune response to that involuntary suffering.
Borderlands. I met a friend in in London when I was hanging out with Tommy Lewis. We did a little event in Hampstead Heath, and Hamish showed up, and we had just a fantastic conversation for a long time after. He's putting on a race in the UK, but there was so much about it that captured my imagination and made me think about it a few days after, even weeks after the event, where I was like, man, I just want to talk. And he said, hey, I've got some questions about what it takes to put on a race. And so I thought, hey, let's have that conversation in public, because I bet there's a lot of people. And even if you're not planning to put on a race and you want to hang out with us for this next little bit here and listen, because if you run a race, it'd be great to know what your race directors go through. Everything requires some level of effort, some level of hustle, especially at the small level. And so we're going to talk about how to put on an ultra of your own. Hamish, welcome to the podcast. I have been honestly looking forward to this conversation as long as since we had a beer that night at the Crown next to Hampstead Heath. How are you doing?
I'm good, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just jump right in. Okay. We're going to get to know you through the course of this, but let's get some value like right at the beginning. Can you tell me about the race that you have put on and why you want to know more about race directing?
Sure. So, back at the beginning of the year, probably useful to just give a bit of context.
Yeah.
So back at the beginning of the year, my friend and I were looking at kind of like our plan for the year and thinking about how we can kind of map out a series of kind of ultra marathons, big, hard physical challenges that we could take on as a pair. And, we were thinking, how can we also like find a community of people to do this with? And originally we just thought this is just going to be a group of friends, so we reached out to a few group chats and we got a really big response, a lot of friends and then friends of friends, and then just complete strangers wanted to come along for this kind of like series of challenges that we'd planned for the year. And so what we thought was best was to kind of set up something a bit more formally, get a website together, create a name for this kind of community that we were creating.
And what'd you call it?
And we called it ARC Project.
ARC Project?
Yeah, correct.
And is it arcproject.com or what's the website?
arcproject.community.
.community. Got it.
Yeah. .com was a bit expensive and a bit out of our price range. But we sent out this sign up link and we just started getting loads of signups. Running is big in the UK, but typically people are focused on half marathons. But there's this growing ultra marathon community, and I think a lot of people kind of really wanted to get involved in that. And there's kind of an underserved niche at the moment in the UK for that. You've got people like William Googe out in Australia at the moment.
I'm so pumped on William Googe.
Yeah, representing. But he, and other people like him have inspired this kind of like movement to get involved in these bigger challenges. So we set up ARC Project. Since then, we've had, I think, like 350 people sign up to become part of this community that we built. And back in January, it wasn't that big. But what we decided we'd do was we were going to hold 4 challenges a year. So one each season. First one was going to be in spring, and then obviously throughout the rest of the year. And so what we decided to do was, we just need to get our first event under our belt, first challenge under the belt. So we said, what can we do? We keep it simple, 50K ultra marathon through the South Downs National Park, which is about an hour away south of London.
Okay.
And so we basically told the people that had signed up, like, we're going to do this race, come along, we're going to put it on for free. We want to start building this community, and like, we'll basically accept the cost of the first challenge. And so, we basically 2 months later all rocked up in the South Downs National Park. We managed to actually rent out a venue and get some like free stuff from a few sponsors. And basically 50 people showed up, which was, we never thought it was going to be that many people. Wow. We always thought it would just be like a few of our friends who would have come along for the ride. And basically we ran that first event and learned an awful lot from running our first ultra. Both of us are complete amateur trail runners.
Yeah.
We only really got into the sport in like the last year. But we, took it upon ourselves to run this challenge. And we met a lot of really difficult things during, there was a couple of weeks before where I was sat down mapping out routes for the medical team to get to parts of the mountain and negotiating with the local farmer whether we could use his road. And I was like, I don't know what I've got myself into here. But nonetheless, the event was really successful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that had never been ultramarathon runners completed the challenge. And
I think it's important to note because, part of my reason for moving to Europe, I mean, there's a number of reasons, but at the top of the list is I wanted to understand running in Europe. We had the opportunity to move over here and I wanted to understand running in Europe. And I don't know if I would have articulated it that way when we moved over here, but now that I'm over here and I'm seeing it up close, I've heard that France now has more trail races than road races, but running is massive. And being in London for the first time, a few months ago now, for the London Marathon and to do that event with Tommy, there's the number of runners in the UK. Like in America, running, the joke was always that running was the punishment for the core sports. So football, baseball, basketball, American football, baseball, basketball. Running is what you did when you messed up. That was your punishment. And what I've seen over here is just that, even my son in school, he's now 12 years old and, they were out, they do sport and over here, they don't put the S at the end. You do sport. And he was doing sport on a Friday and it was like, they were pushing him to run 6K at the time, 11-year-old, and they're timing it. And it's just running is sort of ingrained into life over here a lot more. So for you to say, your community is 350 people, you had 50 people come out the first time, like in American terms, those are fantastic numbers because our biggest events in America are still not big. And that's because permitting issues. But so I guess out of the gates, kudos to you on those numbers. And so you've done that one event, 50 people turned out, you didn't charge for it. And have you done event number 2 and charged for it yet? Or is that where you're at right now?
So that's where we're at. We're about 9 weeks out from the next challenge, which is going to be the summer challenge. And basically, we're in the process of trying to put this race together. So we've got about 100 people currently signed up for this one. This one is paid. It's like, but it's not expensive. It's like 30 quid.
Okay.
And basically, we're just again like absorbing a lot of the costs and trying to grow this community. Trying to offer value before we ask for too much.
Okay, so 30 quid in US dollars, back of the envelope is like $35. So with that price, it's also important to note that ultras and trail races and everything over here in Europe is like half the price in America. So our version of that in America would be like a $70 race, like get in, jump in and do something. That would still feel like a huge discount. So can we start there? Like, how did you set your pricing at 35?
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably very naively, to be honest with you, and not with an understanding of necessarily how many people are going to come to the second challenge or how many people are going to sign up.
Yeah.
But basically, we just wanted to, we absorbed some of the costs for the first one, which was stuff like the venue, stuff like, we went out and bought a bunch of food for people for the aid stations and that sort of thing. We basically like put our fingers in the air and tried to figure out something that was going to kind of cover the basic costs of, basically hiring the venue.
Yeah.
We're a bit more fortunate in this challenge because this challenge is kind of like a backyard format.
Okay.
So it's like a 5K loop that you do on the hour every hour for 24 hours. And so basically it's actually logistically a lot easier than putting on the 50K, which is like you need to have aid stations at every 8K and people get lost. And so, to be honest with you, the short answer is we kind of figured it out at the start and hope that it's going to cover the cost of the challenge. Not the most business savvy way of doing it, I understand.
No. I mean, I think on some levels, when you haven't, if it's not your day job and you're open to coming out of pocket a little bit, you were clearly open to coming out of pocket on the first one and paying for some of that. if you're open to coming out of pocket a little bit. I mean, there's different ways to look at pricing. One of them is you add up all your costs per runner and then you put a multiplier on it. So if it cost you $5 per runner, in food and permits, you divide all that out, $5, you could 2x it or, 3x it. But then you say, hey, this event costs $15, and your runners might perceive it as cheap. So there's this methodology of cost plus. You add up all your costs and put something plus on top of it. And then there's this assessment of what the market's willing to pay. And so you want to know what those runners are willing to pay. So clearly they're willing to pay 30 quid.
Yeah.
And did you get anybody who gave you any unwarranted feedback of like, hey, this is too cheap or this is too expensive?
We didn't get any. I mean, maybe a couple of friends that want to get in for free. No, to be honest with you, I feel like everyone has been, very acknowledging that events cost. And I definitely now, as someone that's put on one race, like, you understand why these events cost what they do a lot of the time. Like, you're paying for things like insurance that the runner doesn't really see, right? They don't really ever see those costs because they're in the like a rare eventuality, but you have to have that as a race director. So you absorb a lot of like the hidden costs that people would never see, but if something bad was to happen, then you're protected. So
right.
I mean, it's been a really difficult thing just trying to figure out how much people are willing to pay. I originally even thought 30 quid was too much, which in hindsight now, I listened to your podcast the other day where you broke down some of the races, the cost per mile. And I was like, oh, we've really undervalued, we've really gone too low here.
It's a great, I appreciate you bringing that up. I haven't thought about that in a while. That was something we did with Wolf Runner, Brian Peterson. And the idea is that you take the total cost of the race and you divide it by the total distance, and you get a cost per mile or a cost per kilometer. And it's a great way to standardize things. So you can look at other races. You can look at some UK race, some GB Ultra up there, and be like, okay, what are they getting per kilometer? And what are they giving in return for that? They're a massive race organization. So they have a lot of overhead. They have to pay a lot of people in order to make that happen. You don't have that, but could you still get the same price and then just make a little bit more profit than they do? Pay some more prize money, something like that, whatever you want to do in that realm. But that metric of cost per kilometer, cost per mile really helps you assess your competition and the people around you to be like, okay, am I delivering what they're delivering? And am I getting, out of it what I need to get out of it? Interesting metric.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, back of the envelope calculation, this is a 5K on the hour every hour for 24 hours. So 120K 30 quid divided by that is about 25p, which is probably like 30 cents or something.
Yeah, that's a great deal.
I mean, it's a good deal. Yeah,
those backyards like Lazarus Lake, Laz Lake, who came up with that, he really gave a gift to the race directing world because it's an incredible concept. It's a concept that brings the community together. It's so cool because every lap, the community always gets to be together. So you're always with this core group of people that love running, love each other. Every hour on the hour, they're going out. It's such a great model for the runner. Like, it's a great runner experience. And it's like you say, one aid station. It's simple. You're marking only 5 kilometers. So you don't have people out screwing with your flags and taking them out and all that sort of stuff. It's a great model.
Yeah. And it was so funny on the first challenge when we were putting together like the actual course itself.
Yeah.
It was Sonny and I took a day off work the day before and just walked the route. We made the signs ourselves and we're like hammering them in places. And before the event, we actually asked everyone to just share their location, their iPhone location with someone. It was the most budget way of running a race.
That's great.
But it worked. And I suppose like the second one, we were like, wow, it's going to be so much easier.
Yeah.
It's just a 5K loop.
Would you use a term in the UK, dirtbag? Does that term translate to you?
I've heard it. I understand it. I wouldn't say that it's something that we colloquially use.
Yeah. Okay.
What explain it to me so I don't get it wrong.
So dirtbags are exactly what you just did. It's like, hey, we're out here because we love it. We don't care what gear we're wearing. In some levels, they'll say, hey, we're not, we're brand agnostic. We will not be defined by a brand. And in so doing, that's their brand, is that they're not going to be defined by a brand. They're just going to buy shorts from a local thrift store if they need to. It's utility. It's about what works. just so that they can get out into the mountains and the deserts and do what they love. They're going to live out of their van if they have to. Just everything is pragmatic. Everything is entirely about getting out into the wilderness, and nothing sexy, nothing matters except running in the wilderness. That's the dirtbag culture to a degree. And so what you're saying like is a perfect, like, that's romantic to the dirtbag. It's like, okay, well, I don't want to have to tell people where I'm at, but I've got my phone. I'll just share it with somebody. Let's go.
Yeah.
It's great.
I actually have a question regarding this kind of like dirtbag culture, I suppose, similar to what I've been thinking about recently. Is like, as a race director, one of the things you've got to try and do is make sure everyone's safe, right? And I think that in one of your podcasts a while ago, you talked about when people were asked how safe do you think a trail runner should be, and they said like a 9.8 out of 10, and they said, well, how safe are you? And they said like a 2 or something. And so obviously you've got a clear disjunction there between people that are coming into the race probably arguably underprepared, and your responsibility as a race director to keep everyone safe. Now, the question that I have is that one of the things you want to try and keep in like these trail events is kind of like the spirit of that dirtbag culture, right? You want people to feel like they're just going out there and it's not, the production is like not too high, which would kind of ruin the feel of that. So one of the questions I've got now, practically putting on these challenges coming up, is how do you try and keep that dirtbag culture whilst also making sure that people are safe?
Right. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because the maintaining of the dirtbag culture, like at its core, is to say, look, we want this to feel authentic and real and organic and a true expression of the love of this running. And so you want to preserve that. And then on the other hand, like so just to give a little bit more flesh to what you said, I originally came to Paris 3 years ago to work with other entrepreneurs, to dream about what I was going to do next. We were all building in different industries, all sorts of stuff. I was looking at trail running. And right before I came on that trip, there was a friend of mine, his best friend's son got lost in the Enchilada Mountain. I don't know how to word it. It was called the La Plata Enchilada in Colorado. Snowstorm came in. He was running alone, and his body was never found to this day. And right before I went to that program, so I just became like obsessed with like, oh man, we're always the thing that gets us in most trouble as trail runners is our fitness. Because we believe that we're strong, and we genuinely are to a degree, relatively speaking. And so the thing that gets us in trouble is that we go deep into the mountains, believing that we can do it on our own. And so you ask a runner, I surveyed 1,000 runners, and the prevailing feedback was, we think you should be safe when you're running. And it's like, okay, that's great. Who's you? And because then you ask them, how safe are you actually on a scale of 1 to 10? And they would say 2.5. So yeah, you need to be safe. I don't need to, because I'm fit and I'm strong and I'm resourceful. And so the heart of the culture is to go get lost. Like it's the American West. It's this character named Everett Roos coming out of Utah, who and when he was 21 years old, he was on an adventure, I think 21, thereabouts, on an adventure in the desert of Utah. And this was, I don't know, 1920s, 1930s, 40s, something like that. And he just disappears into the desert forever. He never is found again. The last letter he sent to his family, I'm going to the desert. And we romanticize that. Like, it would be great to just go disappear into the mountains. The mountains are calling. John Muir, like, I'm going to the mountains. I'm going to get lost. Why climb that mountain? Because it's there. All of these sort of like things pull us in, and we romanticize it, but the practical outcome is that we are very unsafe. And so for me, like, okay, it comes down to your logistics company that you work with. Now, as a first-time race director, you generally don't even think like, hey, there's a company I could hire that handles my logistics, my timing, all of this sort of stuff. Aid station check-in, aid station check-out. We're using a company called Brooksy that has this thing called Laurel Timing. That's really incredible. But the first thing is you got to have this element of knowing who's out on the trail and between which two aid station at any given time they're out there. And because a trail runner will not buy these great Garmin devices, or like you see for the 200-mile races, they'll carry these spot trackers. For a 50K, they're not going to have any technology like that. They won't invest in it. They won't buy it. It's too expensive. There's a monthly fee to it. So how do you keep them safe? Well, I think this Brooksy has done a great job. They have this technology that when you pick up your bib, it's on the bib. It does have like a little small battery that's attached to it, and it tracks the runner, and it goes over these timing belts along the way, and you can set up as many as you want. So at any given time, let's say you have 5 aid stations, okay, they cross the first one at the start line. You have 100 runners between aid station 1, aid station 2. Then between aid station 2, aid station 3, you have 99. Well, what happened to that other one? Okay, we know who that one is. We know where they are in between those two things. So it's not perfect, but it's going to give you a relative area if you need to search and find them. And then there's this other technology that's in the ski industry called Recco, RECCO. And I think that they are trying, and I know that I really want them to get into trail running stuff. So the idea is that you have this Recco piece of technology, hardware, that's sewn into your pack, so a trail runner can't forget it. They can't, cut it out or anything like that. It's in their pack. And if all of a sudden they're between aid station 1, aid station 2, search and rescue can't find them, or your internal search and rescue, and you have to bring in the big dogs to come in with the helicopters and stuff. Well, the helicopters have technology on them that can find the thing that's sewn hopefully into their pack here, or it could be sewn into their shorts. It could be sewn into belts, of any kinds where they can be found. Recco's not really in trail running yet, but I think that makes a ton of sense for them to go all in, because that is should be layer number 5 in safety. Hopefully the runner's safe. Hopefully they have GPX on their watch, so if they get off course, they can get back on course. You have a good logistics company that has your time in and time out of each aid station and everything all the way around. And at the bottom, they get lost. You just can't find them. Hopefully they have one of those Recco tags on them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You're describing. We did something that was incredibly budget version of kind of this, where we essentially had an Excel spreadsheet. Each aid station on people's phones, and as people ran past, we would update the numbers.
Perfect. Yep.
So it was like our budget Recco.
Yep. Yeah. I mean that solves the. I mean, I think that's what most people do early on. Like, there's this intuition behind. We got to know who's out there and roughly where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's for their sake. And if you have an insurance policy, and let's say something catastrophic happens, you have your insurance policy. If you can't prove to them like industry standard safety measures, there's no guarantee that insurance policy covers you as a race director. Of course, we don't want anything bad to happen to the runner. We're just talking from a business standpoint and risk. Like, you are exposed if you don't have something like that to show that, hey, we're trying to track runners, we're trying to keep an eye on them. We can't be with them the whole time, but we're trying. That's mission critical to preserving your insurance policy.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Josh. I have another question.
Yes.
This time more around sponsorships. So I've heard you say on a couple of occasions, you've got to tread carefully with sponsorships. Sponsorships is something that, once you introduce a brand into your brand, it can limit the way that you speak about things. If the brand says things you don't like, then that obviously affects your ability to express yourself as a brand. So I'm trying to navigate this at the moment, thinking about the sponsorships, who we bring on, what sort of partnership deals to have. And I just wanted to hear from your perspective, like, how have you managed that in the past? How have you managed the sponsorships angles whilst also trying to maintain, the culture of your brand? How's that been so far?
That's a great question. I am such a relational person. I would say that my biggest strength is also my biggest weakness, is that I'm pure relationship guy. And I'm so concerned with great outcomes. The average person that you meet is most concerned with themselves getting the best possible outcome. And if you look at all my personality tests, everything I've ever taken that kind of gives a snapshot of who I am, I'm always for the team before I'm for myself. And team is defined as just anybody who has a stake, who has an interest in any way in anything that I'm doing. And so I always want to get a win for the people that I'm working with on any level. If it's a race, I want the runner experience to be great. I want the sponsor experience to be great. I want the volunteer experience to be great, and all that. So when it comes to sponsors, by the time someone is writing a check for something that I'm doing, we're already friends. And I've never had a corporate job of, of any kind. So I don't even have the framework for building a relationship purely that's extractive in nature, where I'm going to get something out of you professionally. And I think that's partially my weakness, even though I wouldn't word it as crass as I'm going to extract something from you, but to say, hey, it's a partnership. I need something, you need something. So if you ever see a partner in anything that I'm doing, a brand that's partnered with me, you'll know that I also know that person, whoever the contact is, I have a relationship with him. So Path Projects, I was at lunch one day in Salt Lake City, and I'm talking about running the Zion 100, and this other guy's like, "Great, yeah, no, I heard that you're going to be running it. My name's Brian. I own Path Projects." And I was like, "Are you kidding? I just bought a bunch of Path stuff for my 100-mile effort." We become friends, and over time, I'm like, "Hey, I really want to work with Path, but you're my friend. I don't want this to be anything that gets weird between our friendship. But if you see an opportunity, like I love Path. I was already wearing it before we became friends." And he's like, "Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, we want to do something together, but I don't want it to be weird for our friendship." So it's not like there's no good roadmap here other than step one. If you have a legit friendship with whoever's writing the checks, that helps. It's also hard. So if you are just in that like very business-like relationship, it's hard. I'm batting 1,000 on bringing brands where I'm friends with the people in it. And I'm like 0 on if I don't have like a good friendship with someone. Even Naked, who I'm working with now, the owner, Lindsay, and I have become friends, and he's going to meet me in Salt Lake next week. So if I'm going to talk about, so all this is how I'm pointing to say, yeah, if by the time I'm bringing a partner in, I have a relationship with them, and I am almost effortlessly preserving my brand because we know each other. And I see something in their brand thinking, hey, Path, you're right now, you're only men only apparel. You don't have any female apparel. And, my audience is 85% male. Like, hey, there's already it's already going to be great for everybody, for 85% of my audience. So by the time we even have the conversation, there's already like real alignment. Now, if I were to bring on a larger sponsor, which I hope to do at some point with someone that I don't know that well, you're probably going to be battling to some degree if you're bringing on a Nike, because they're going to want to control the messaging top to bottom. But if you bring in like a Hoka or, someone who's big, but still the reputation is like relational with their race directors, in the end, you're looking for a partnership. So that's why when you are reaching out to these brands, you're looking for like partnership managers. That partnership is critical because they need you and you need them. So if your race has 300 people and you can provide the demographic and this is who we are, they're not going to write you the check unless they feel like cultures are aligned. But in the end, it's your event. You're making the decisions. They have to trust you. And so that's why sometimes bringing on sponsors can take several years, because you need to be able to have this track record of saying, look, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. This is in order to get the big check. You can probably get $500 here, $500 there, $1,000 there. But before you get like the $10,000, $20,000 checks, you have to have this proven track record. And by the time they're writing that check, you are probably, if you're a relational in nature, you are going to inherently preserve your brand, and you're going to use your brand to protect their brand. Like it's just going to, it's a partnership.
So I have one point of clarification and one question.
Yeah.
On what you just said. So the point of clarification is, I suppose the best way to position yourself then is to build relationships now. Start speaking to people, start speaking to different brands.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. The question I've got is actually related to more like the marketing of your challenge and how you're building your content out from the different races that you're doing. And one of the conflicts that I've had, and it'd be interesting to get your take, is that you're trying to position yourself to tell a story, and the brand buys into that, and that's why they partner with you.
Yeah.
The one thing that we've been internally thinking about is, do you position your kind of race as something that is a spectacle of kind of endurance? People are coming out here that are either big ultra runners or like really good athletes. Or do you position your messaging so it's like for more of like the back of the pack, the people that aren't necessarily, super elite? I'll give you an example. We had someone come to the first challenge who was one of my friends, His name's Rod. He's originally from the Congo, moved to the UK, had a really difficult upbringing, and basically has really pulled himself out of a difficult situation. He's actually applying for a PhD now in law. He's done really, really well. But last year he hadn't run. He'd only run 3 kilometers. And he came out, and I was even a bit unsure whether he was going to complete this ultra. And he trained for it, and he did it. And he was DFL, if you like, but he did it. And that was like a really powerful story that we captured and tried to tell as a piece of content. But I'm thinking going forward now, trying to position ourselves with partnership brands. Do you think that the marketing is changing where they want to hear more of the stories of people like Rod, or is it still the more conventional, like front of the pack, the Nike Kipchogis, the Mo Farahs, the these sorts of runners that are, just part of the culture? Where do you think the marketing is going? How do you think we can best position ourselves in terms of a content strategy to develop these partnerships with brands?
Gosh, such a good question. My mind's all over the place. And I'll say that I'll bring you my take on it, but as many experts that are listening to this, there are going to be that many unique takes on it. I have talked to a handful of brands who have basically said the win on Sunday, sell on Monday model for marketing isn't working compared to other things that they're, let's say, A/B testing. So the whole foundation of Borderlands was this idea of like me, this slow runner who loves it. I would be running these ultras and thinking, man, Solomon should be sponsoring me, like the full price athlete. The one I'm paying full price for every piece of gear. They should be talking to me more, not putting up these idealized images, which is great. Killian is awesome. I don't have any. There's not. When I see Killian running, I never think that could be me. And the sport isn't set up to like football. You see Messi play, and you go buy Messi's jersey. That's how you respond to a great performance. Well, in running, you respond to a great performance by going and running yourself. So, the merchandising is different. Everything like that is different. So if you're looking to position yourself and you're thinking of, okay, is it the elite experience? Is it the fast experience? Is that the thing that's going to sell? I think that part of the sport of running, of trail running specifically, is still working itself out. I think they just adopted a marketing model from the NBA, from, baseball. They adopted that and said, hey, we did it over there. We put our brand on the best, most talented, fastest athlete so that they could go do well, stand on a podium, and everybody would respond by purchasing that brand. But then you look at, people like Brian Peterson or Mike Kratzer, who are these people who are not event driven in their running. So a lot of the world that we're coming from is like, you run so that you can go do an event. But there's this whole world out there that people who run purely because they just love it and they don't need an event to motivate them. That's not me. I need an event to motivate me. So then how do you position yourself to get the check from the brand? So in thinking about all of these different ways, it comes down to who's your ideal brand partner, and how realistic is it that they would write a check to an event that's your size? And let's use Path Projects as the example. If I didn't have them and I wanted them, I would just first, you got to get them on the phone. This is one of the things that Hamish, you specifically, I liked about you when we met that day. You're like, oh, you have information on this stuff? I've been thinking about this stuff. I'm going to ask you questions. That is the hustle attitude that, again, a race director who's been doing this for 20 years, they may have this mode. I know how to get on the phone with the right person at Hoka, whatever. For me, it would be like, okay, start with Instagram. I'm going to Instagram whoever's managing their Instagram and just be like, hey, I love your brand. It'd be a dream to work together someday. Can we talk for 10 minutes? It's important to know that nobody wants to have a long conversation if they don't know you, and it's not like a off the clock situation. And then you get a 10-minute call with them, and you set a timer for 10 minutes. And when the 10-minute timer goes off, if you actually get them on the phone, you say, hey, 10 minutes is up. This is what I said I would take. And Can we talk again soon?
Mm.
And in that 10 minutes, the whole question is it'd be my dream to have you a part of my race someday. I don't know that I'm ready yet, but what would you need to see from me in this event to even consider partnering with me on it? So you position yourself the way that you, Hamish, naturally position yourself as a student coming in and deferring to their expertise. And they're the check writer. So you'd be like, hey, I want to do it. I think we're aligned. What do you even write checks to events like this? And then you figure out, you get their answers, and all this happens in 10 minutes. And you're like, hey, you want to see, for it to be worth your time, you want to see this type of reach, and you want to see this many runners, or you want to see this sort of like output, or they'll want to be like, okay, because in real life experiences are what brands I think want most.
Sure.
So you're providing an in real life experience, and then they'll come activate at it. So they'll be at your finish line. Pat's going to be at my finish line next week, and Billy Yang's going to be there, and Floris Gearman's going to be there, and all these great people, because they want to activate and get all this great footage and create these great, you come running across the finish line, and then you see all this Path Project stuff, and those chemicals are firing. So they're creating this emotional connection,
associations
with a brand.
Sure.
So it's not a long play, but it's not a short play. It's a medium play. It's, hey, I'm doing this now. I've got this other event coming up. It's going to be great, but I want to work with you, and I just want to know what do you write checks for? Do you write checks? Would you ever write check? So it's all about using that like entrepreneurial spirit to get the right person, and on the phone is important. Nothing translates on email because they need to hear the enthusiasm in your voice.
Yeah, it's really useful as well, because I think the one thing that we've been in the thick of it, right? We're trying to fight fires of speaking to local farmers and speaking to in the UK, speaking to the local council, and they send you to every other person, and you arrive back at the first person who said they didn't
That's
care.
America too. Yeah.
Okay, it's good to know that it travels across the pond. But yeah, so we're really in the thick of it, and I think that when you're putting out fires all the time and trying to figure out the next thing, you don't necessarily think about these laying the framework. And I think it's actually really practical and useful for us to know that, like, we need to be, for instance, we went to, one of the team went to the London Marathon and met so many people
Perfect.
there, which was fantastic. And I think that you're right. It's just really useful for us to hear that, the right thing to do is to basically start laying these foundations for, not the second event, but like the fifth, sixth event now. Makes a lot of sense.
It's critical, and then you're showing that. I mean, in some levels, it's just not a clear roadmap, other than get the right person on the phone and be approachable yourself, and in that 10 minutes get intel. And let's say your target brand was Nike, and you by some magic get that person on the phone, and they say it's never going to be us. And you say, hey, before you hang up, could you just tell me, curiously, like the last check that your department wrote for an event and why? Like, a lot of people who are in these positions who will actually get on the phone with you love to tell. It's not an arrogant thing, but they love to say, hey, this is what I've done in the past. And like for someone to be interested in that, but this is where it comes back to like you're actually building a true friendship. Like, you are genuinely impressed with them. They did something super cool, and you are like kind of fanning out on them. And so I would never advocate that you do that manipulatively, but if you really are like impressed with something that they've done, and you ask them a few insightful, like not off the shelf questions, you know what I mean? Like, you have thought about, like, hey, this is a question I have for you. Like, that stuff really matters. Like, people have done cool stuff, and when someone sees it and asks them an insightful, thoughtful question, that moves the needle and not only building the relationship, but giving you some intel that you need. So maybe it's not Nike, but now you've just learned something amazing, and you get to Hoka, and then it's not Hoka, but you just learned like 10 more interesting things, and finally you get to the perfect brand for you, and you do a 3-year deal with them for your race. But it's predicated on like true friendship and true like relationships. I think a lot of people don't like what I just said, because I'm like this, but this going back to like, I'm just a very relational person.
Sure. Yeah. Related question, Josh. Obviously you can use the brands to help promote the race, but how do you promote your races? The ones that you've held so far, how do you go about that? I mean, obviously you've got kind of like the indirect content. You've got Borderlands, which obviously I know now you've got Wilder and other things that will start to like naturally be a magnet for people to understand what's going on. But yeah, it's a really like you're obviously trying to sort out all the logistics, but you also want people to show up, right? And I think we're already actually at capacity for what we can manage for the next event without
that's awesome.
Without necessarily just quitting our jobs today. But generally, what has been your strategy to promote races?
Great question. You have to have this appearance like you've got it together and that you have a strategy. And that appearance is put on display, like running. So much of the running world is on Instagram. So Instagram is a great place to put forward this position of strength, good content strategy, hopefully some engagement. Hopefully people are liking it. But I don't know that anybody does anything without some level of personal connection to it. I'll say this. I don't know that anyone's ever done anything that I have put out into the world without some level of personal connection to get the flywheel turning. So when Borderlands started, I was maxing out Instagram's allowable like daily messages, sending individual messages to people. You could do like 30 an hour without them, dinging your account and making it stop, because the personal outreach is among the most effective. So you have this position and you see all these brands, all these people getting started, and they put this great face forward. You have to put the great face forward. But the lie that we'll believe is that great face forward is the thing that's moved the needle for them. So you see Mike Kratzer, who has just this incredible Instagram feed and incredible engagement. And that content on its own at this point in the flywheel, and I'm not speaking because I talked with Mike about this specifically. I'm just using him as an example. His flywheel is turning. But to get that flywheel turning, I mean, he in person, he's just a great guy, and he is marketable, and brands are wanting to attach themselves to him. He's like a face of New Balance right now. But all of that cool face forward stuff, if you meet him in person, you're like, oh man, I get it now. What a great guy. What a great guy. Because the personal touch is still the greatest mover in my realm, in my world of everything that I've done. The personal touch, the personal relationship is what makes the deal. So this is what's hard about being B2C. This is why VCs don't like B2C, because you have to sell 100 people to run your race at 30 quid. Compared to a B2B play where maybe I need to sell one person and I get 20,000.
Yeah.
So what that means, but B2C is passion for me. I've done some B2B stuff and I don't like it. I love the end user. And so what that means is that you're selling 100 individuals to come run your race. And sometimes that's 100 messages, that's connections, that's getting in their messages, or you see stuff that they post and you're just commenting on it. To get the flywheel turning, it's outreach. It's individual outreach. That's what has been successful for me. Some people can make it happen without that, but there's just nothing that replaces the individual outreach and then the in real life. So going to London Marathon, brilliant. In real life, there's just no replacing it.
100%. We definitely, an interesting phenomenon. Obviously, I'm the beginner in this scenario, but something that I think would be useful to share is that because we had a limited number of spaces that we could, logistically manage for the challenge, we actually made the application to Arc Project kind of like an application. You signed up and you answered a bunch of questions similar to kind of like, I suppose, Speed Project or something like that.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Which is fun. We're actually one of my co-founders of this met Niels.
Yeah.
At the London Marathon, and we're actually doing Speed Project this year. So
are you? Which one?
Chamonix.
Dude, he invited me to that too.
Oh, really?
I just, it's not the right time. I had an hour phone call with him the other day, and I just want the world to know. I don't know. I hope this is on brand for him. The most creative, nicest guy I have ever met. I have never been, I'm around creative people all the time. At the end of that call with him, I didn't even know what to do with myself. I had never, you think you talk to someone, you ask them a question, and you think you know where it's going. And at every moment he said something, it was not where I thought it was going. And it was brilliant. And it made me think, okay, this is why Speed Project is what it is. Anyway, sorry, I just had to say.
No, for sure. And I think like we learned an awful lot from that process, kind of accidentally almost, which is that when you create an event that has some sort of scarcity to it, it creates a
Yes.
natural flywheel of attention. It's
Yes.
you put a password on the website, and you ask a couple of questions about why it is you think that you should do hard things and push yourselves to do an event like this. And it was just incredibly interesting.
I love it.
The phenomenon that occurred from that, and it became infinitely easier. Now we've got an event that's pretty much maxed out. So I just thought that would be useful to share.
Yeah.
And I've learned that lesson from those guys who do it best.
That's great.
It'd be great to do this event this year as well.
Yeah, I mean the scarcity approach in everything, in sales, e-com, all that. Like you'll see sometimes where like you'll put something in e-commerce, you'll put it in your cart, and all of a sudden this timer will start to go on, and like you've got 15 minutes or you're going to lose this. Or if it's like you're buying tickets to Taylor Swift or something, and it's like, okay, we'll hold your tickets for 15 minutes. You need to buy them. Buy now. Like anytime that you can create synthetic scarcity. I mean, I would say not all scarcity is synthetic, but anything that you can do that gives it the appearance of that just increases demand, whether the person knows it or not who's making that. But that's I love that you did that. And I love the TSP reference.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's interesting because in our scenario, it's actually not synthetic, right? We can only have a certain number of people because so that worked out really well. But the other amazing thing that came out of that is that we had a pretty basic application form, but people would answer the question of like, why is it that you want to do this event? And obviously all of those answers are anonymized, but it was wonderful. Like reading people who have clearly spent a lot of effort to articulate why it is that they do the things that they do, and really deep, meaningful stories.
Yeah.
That I think, if we hadn't have done that, I would never have heard those stories.
Yeah.
And it's actually a conversation that me and you had, right, when we were at the pub.
Yeah.
After a couple of pints, and I think I asked you the question of like, why do you think you do these 100-mile races? Why do you think you run as far as you do? And I've been thinking about your answer a lot. Maybe you'll be better at articulating it than I can. Paraphrasing what I remember from a month or so ago, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many over time, but the one that we talked about that night, thanks to our pre-roll conversation, was I want to show my kids that that dad's out trying to do things. Like there's my work day, even though it's in running, like 80% of my work day is doing running related things. It's on my computer. They come home from school and then dad's doing running stuff on his computer. I'm a keyboard warrior as far as what they see, except for when I go out and do these big efforts, or I try for them, or I obsess over them. I spend all the time training for them. And my friend Brian Peterson does a good job of talking about that commitment to the day in and day out, and what that models to your kids and to yourself. And so there's a big part of it right now, after having been doing it since in ultras since 2012, is now I'm just thinking about like, I really want my kids to get into it, to get all of this joy that comes from the sport. And so there's a part of it that, like, if my wife can, get them to the finish line in Paris at, it was midnight in Paris, that finishing my last 50 miler, where she was able to get my 11-year-old over there to see it. And it's like, yeah, them seeing that, part of me feels like, do they get it? But then, how much they talk about it, or I catch them talking about it with their friends. Like, this is what my dad does. To me, that's a big part of it right now, is like showing them that, dad's a warrior.
Yeah. I thought about that a lot. It's been funny. It's like when you become a race director, you do ask yourself the question, you're waking up at 5 a.m. to go to the race, and you're in the car and you're asking yourself the question, right? Like, I'm going to say a few words before the race. Like, why is it that we're getting 50 people to show up and do this? And you really have a bit of an existential crisis. You're like, oh my goodness, there's so much effort. And what if something goes wrong? And what if someone gets hurt? And what if someone gets lost, and all of these things. And I was sat there with my co-founder Sunny in the car, and we were really trying to like articulate what this is. And so it was interesting, like when I had that conversation with you, I feel like I've started to collect these answers as to why it is that people do these hard things. And I think that, for me, it actually comes down to like there's three principal arguments. The first one was the one that I suppose, introduced me to this idea of doing hard things, which is one that's introduced a lot of people, which I think is the Goggins argument, right? It's that, or it's also like sits within Stoicism, which is like life will present itself with involuntary suffering. So choose voluntary suffering to create an immune response to that involuntary suffering, which I think is great. And I think that like that for me is like a big reason why I wanted to take on these challenges and do these things. But also, I don't think it resonates with everybody. I think that it can masquerade people attack it as it's kind of like masochistic, masquerading as kind of like proactive resilience. But I don't believe that. But I think that when you're trying to come up with the message as a race director, you're trying to think about something that's novel and new. So the second argument that we talked about was this kind of like memories argument, which is like, you think back to last year, you think about how many of the days of last year you can actually remember, and you run through that kind of like thought experiment, and you realize that so many of the days you forget. And you even think back to last Tuesday and you ask yourself the question of like, what did I do? And you can't remember. And it's what a tragedy. You think about that. And I think it's so sad that days come and go and they die and you don't think about them. And then you think back on like, what are the days I do remember? And the days you do remember are the days that you did the 100-miler. It's the days that you pushed yourself to do the marathon. And so one of the things we said before the challenge is like, our goal here, our ARC project, is to, yes, make you push yourself, but it's also to give you back 4 days of the year, give you back 4 days that you aren't going to forget.
Yeah.
And which I thought was really powerful. The one problem I had with this memories argument was that you're kind of perpetually living for the future and then always living in the past. It doesn't really, speak to the presence of trail running. So then I feel like, about an hour before we got to the challenge where we're going to give this talk, we kind of cracked it, which is like, we asked the inverse question of, why is it that a life where you don't take on these challenges is a bad life? And it actually really helped answer the question as to why it is important that you do these things. And I think the answer that we arrived at is that like people that never challenge themselves ultimately, in my belief, live in a smaller world because they never learn that they're capable of doing more. And I think that through completing these hard challenges that you weren't sure that you could complete kind of liberates you from that belief. And when you complete a challenge that you didn't think you could, then you kind of break this this self-imposed limit. And then you start to ask yourself the question of like, where else in my life have I placed these arbitrary limits on myself? And they have held me back for no other reason than I believe them to be true. And I think that like when you go through that process, it's almost a revelation and the world just opens up to you. So it was like a long philosophical conversation. And we arrived at the answer, I think. And there's three compelling ways. But the reason why I really appreciated our conversation is because you added another bow in that string, or string in the bow. And I think it was just really interesting. So please ask people that question on this podcast. I'd love to hear what they have to say. And
man,
I will be collecting them.
Some of my early episodes were diving into that. Like it was more so the question of how do you keep going when you want to quit?
Oh, sure.
And because for me, like I had a quitting problem, and I needed to figure out how to keep going. And I love where your head's at. I have no doubt that, I mean, you got your second event here, and it's already sold out, and you've got the creativity behind it. I mean, you keep putting that on display, and brands are going to find you, and you'll be proactive in finding them. Like, I think it's not going to be long before we hear about, we're chatting again. And the question is, well, I got five, if I got $5,000 here for this, but gosh, I think, with 7,000, we can pull this off better from a sponsor. So how do we get more? What do we do? Like, how do you layer in sponsors, all this sort of stuff? But I have no doubt that what you're building is meaningful, and what brands need to borrow that meaning that hat that you have created of meaning, and they need to be able to put that meaning on, because brands don't mean anything. A nutrition company doesn't mean anything if it's not attached to something meaningful. So they need what you're building, and you need what they've got. And, so I just think, to wind this down for today, I have no doubt that you are already successful, and that you will continue only on that meteoric rise. And I can't wait to talk to you again and have you on the podcast again.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Josh. Really appreciate chatting.
Do it again. Awesome.